Hello, my friends, and welcome to a brand new episode of Discourse in Magic. My name is Jonah Babbins, and in this episode, we sit down with the one and only Derren Brown. This was such an amazing privilege to sit down with Derren, and he was incredible. Derren has reshaped, or rather shaped, modern mentalism. His TV specials are incredible. His shows are amazing. Seeing him perform live is amazing. His thinking is great. And in this episode, he over-delivered too. He explained the behind the scenes of how his TV shows happen and how he pulls that stuff off. He explains how his shows happen and the thinking behind putting effect into his shows and how to do that. He explains what's right and what's wrong with magic and mentalism today, what you can do for your shows. We talk about ethics. We talk about magic. We talk about so much, and it was a privilege. It was an honor, and you are going to love it as much as I did. So here it is, a wonderful time with the one and only Derren Brown. Hello, my friends, and welcome to a brand new episode of Discourse in Magic. My name is Jonah Babbins, and we are here with the one and only Derren Brown. Derren, how are you?
Hey, hello, I'm good. I am isolated in London, and I guess you are isolated. Where are you? Where exactly are you?
I am isolated in Toronto.
In Toronto, hence the Canadian vowel sound. Yeah. With the magic, you've got this magic library behind you, and as you're talking, all I've been doing is trying to look at your magic volumes to see which ones. None of my books. That's what's most embarrassing for you. There's nothing there.
Because I took them all out. I took them all out for research. Yeah. Oh no, at all times. So thank you so much for joining me. This is a real pleasure. And let's start at the very beginning. How did you get started in magic?
Right. So I studied law and German at a university in England, and in my first year, I saw a hypnotist perform, and I decided that's what I was going to learn. I decided pretty quickly I didn't want to be a lawyer or a German. So I was practicing hypnosis on other students. So I got a bit obsessed with it. But the guy that did the hypnosis, Martin Taylor was his name, also did a bit of close-up magic informally. So he was kind of the only role model I had. So I came across a book, which was the Mark Wilson Complete Course in Magic, which was in a secondhand bookstore in Bristol, where I was in the city where I was studying. And I bought that and started learning that too. And then as time went on, although hypnosis had been my first sort of love, when I started working, it was a much easier and more flexible and pleasant job to be a magician than it was to be a hypnotist. So I was doing hypnosis in comfortable venues like student events and things where I could do my full thing in the way that I wanted to do it. And then magic, I was a bit more versatile, so I could do it all over the place. And gradually, the balance of things tipped more towards magic. So by the time I graduated, I kind of was just doing the odd job, and I was getting a bit of kind of welfare money covering my housing and so on, and unemployment. But then gradually it tipped over and I was earning enough. So by maybe a couple of years after university, I was just doing magic, which was a couple of restaurants doing close-up, and then I would obviously do the people's corporate work and the occasional wedding, and I just sort of ticked by, really. I never had a lot of gigs, but I had enough that could keep me going.
And then talk to me about how that transition point really happened. You were in school and then starting to do magic, and I'm sure you started to feel the kind of weights shift of where your interest lies and where your time spent lies and everything like that.
Yeah, I've been doing these sort of gigs alongside my studies, but not very much. It was really after I graduated that I was working. So my days were pretty much empty, and then I would walk around dreaming up magic tricks, and then every Thursday, and I think Thursday and Friday, something like that, I'd have these regular places that I would go to, and then whatever other gigs came in. So there was no real balance other than thinking up magic and then going out and doing it. And from the start, I was always doing my own stuff. That kind of just felt like how you do it. I wasn't a member of any magic clubs or anything. I knew one other magician, maybe two, so I was finding my own way, and that was sort of fine. I remember I've never had, and still don't have, any kind of ambition about it at all. And I get uneasy and uncomfortable when the kind of producers and people around me talk about, oh, this next project will do this, and it'll, or reaching into America and all that kind of stuff. Really, in essence, I'd like to go back to that student situation where I was just, spending the day kind of reading quietly and then going out and doing the odd gig. That was very nice. I've always just sort of felt that you want to take a cross section of your life at any point. Is everything kind of roughly in place? Does it feel about right? And if it isn't, it's normally relatively easy to change if you keep your eye on the present situation like that. So that's only ever been my concern, and things have sort of grown, but really only grown because I've got a team around me that are quite good at, orchestrating things and pitching things and doing the meetings and all of that. But I've never really had any personal drive about it. So yes, I just kind of put myself out there. I think the big thing with any sort of success in a creative venture is talent and energy, and those are the two things that are under your control. So you can develop your talent, but if you don't develop the energy with which you get it out there, then the talent's kind of sort of a bit of a waste. And likewise, you can have all the self-promotional energy, but if you don't have the talent to back it up, you're not going to get very far. So those are really the only two things that you can control. And the rest of it, how lucky you get and so on, is, none of your business. It's nothing to do with you. So I've only ever really just focused on those two things. And then if you do focus on your talent and your energy and you develop those, things tend to kind of come your way because you're creating those opportunities. So things came my way.
Was there a moment that you got to kind of stop worrying about the business side of show business and say, great, I now have people who are my agents, whatever the case may be, and now I can really get in on that, time working on what I'm doing?
Yeah, it was strange from a purely, kind of livelihood business side. My first first TV show went out in December 2000, which was a 1-hour special called Derren Brown, Mind Control. Before that aired, I was, as I've said, I was like a gigging magician, and I was earning maybe like 300 or 500 pounds, whatever that is, back then. So this is like 99, right? And then I did the show, and with the show, I got like an agent, and suddenly it all felt like amazing and professional. And my agent said, well, now if we put you out, we'll put you out for like 3,000. Like it was an extraordinary amount to me. Like it was literally 10 times what I'd been earning. So the show went out, but of course, it's not like everybody saw the show, or even if they did, they didn't know they could hire me to come to their house or whatever. So I got one gig, which was like the week after this show aired, and it was a millionaire guy who since got in trouble with some scandal with him in the political, wherever the government were at the time. So I went to his house, and it was a private party, and I got my $3,000, and I think he tipped me more than I'd ever got for like a gig before. So I thought, this is it, like my life's going to change. And that was it. That was the only gig I had for a year. The show had been and gone, and again, no one really saw it, let alone thought they could hire me. So I was in this weird situation where I'm like, well, I said to my manager, I can't, what do I do? Do I go back and do my restaurants in Bristol? Do I carry on doing that and go out for like, I don't know, whatever, 300 quid for these things? Or is that strange? Like if you're putting me out for more? So he said, yeah, you should probably go back and do those. So I went back and I was working in the restaurants. And I remember a conversation with somebody when they said, oh, you're like that guy on TV. And I said, oh, no, that is actually me. And they didn't believe it because I'm basically like a rose seller in this restaurant. So it was a weird thing. It's not, I guess you see someone on television and you immediately presume they're kind of successful. And, it isn't at all. It took quite a while to kind of get to the point, like another show got commissioned and then another one. And then I started doing tours, and I did a small theatre show, first of all, in Bristol where I was living. So it gradually kind of got to the point that it was kind of comfortable living. It was a strange, like a bit of a bump to get there.
You started with a little bit of hypnotism. You got a little bit more into magic, but it kind of seems like you held on to that seriousness of hypnotism and have really tried to shed the silliness of magic and magic tricks. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you've carved out that space?
I was only really interested in one thing, which was performing the most impressive or the best magic that I could. That was really all I was bothered about. So I was pre the first TV show going out. I was doing these gigs in restaurants and parties, and it was a mixture of magic and mentalism, I guess, and the two fit very well together for me because I was just interested in what the most impressive sort of effects were, and it seemed to me that if you read someone's mind, that would be more interesting than if you kind of found their card. So it didn't bother me that there were supposedly two different genres. And then when the TV stuff kicked off, it made sense to sort of drop the conjuring side and just focus on that. But it was only born out of what the most compelling type of effect is. So that was one thing. And another thing which I think if I've contributed anything to the field of mentalism, it's this. It was a shift to something that seemed really obvious to me, but it didn't seem evident in any of the mentalism that I was seeing. And bear in mind, there were very few mentalists around then. I could think of like 4 back then. I mean, it's a popular thing now, but it sort of really wasn't back then. But what I felt was important was the process. So what mentalism was to me, as far as I could see, was, think of a word and then
yeah.
I write something down and I turn it round and I've written the thing that you were thinking of. And it just felt like, well, what were you even trying to do there? Like, but genuinely, like, even if you got that wrong, that's a really compelling. How did you even think you were going to read that person's mind? So it's not about turning the thing round and going, I got it right, because in theory, it's really interesting, even if you got that wrong. What was that person even trying to do? How could you stand there and confidently read someone's mind? What is that? Even if you get it wrong, what the fuck were you trying to do? So it just struck me that the process was the interesting bit, not the turning round of, not the a match-up of what you wrote, what I wrote, or Julia. So I really started to lean into the process of it and leaning into the process and really, really committing to it so that it makes sense and that it takes the audience's mind to a much richer place. To me, that just seemed a very sort of straightforward thing. And I think if I've contributed anything, it's probably something around that.
I think we've seen a lot of other people now doing, that sort of style and that sort of thinking. And we'll touch on that in a moment. But I wanted to read a quote from one of your books that touches on this moment, which is this: while most performers worry about the ethics of their performance, they are forgetting about their real task, which is to create elegant and convincing illusions. And when I read that line, it really stuck out to me because I think many people buy in to the things that they're watching. I think many people are saying, wow, this is really happening. But I think that's what makes it stronger and what makes it stick with people better. Do you want to touch a little bit on the ethics of, people's thinking on the matter? And I'll just tell the quickest story in the world, but my cousin who lives in New York, he's a really clever lawyer. I came to see Secret before it was on Broadway, then again on Broadway. And then I told him, you have to go.
Thank you.
Loved it. It was awesome. And I said, you have to go check it out. And he went, and I said, all I want you to do is call me after the show, because he didn't know anything about you. And someone who I thought was really intelligent and real clever. And he left and he's like, this man has real psychic powers. He can read my mind. He knows what I'm thinking. He can read people's minds. And I empathize and, I sympathize with the guy. So can you talk a little bit about, I guess, your take on some of the ethics of how people might feel after seeing a show? And
I think the first thing is it's with mentalism, it's a tricky fine line that you're treading, and it's going to be different for different people. As with anything you do and get a lot of different responses for, there's a bell curve, and you only really take responsibility for the sort of the main swell in the middle. You have to look where that is, because I get people that say, you're psychic and you won't admit it, or people that say it's all, stooges and camera tricks and so on. And you've always got to allow for the kind of outliers on either side. So you have to look at the swell in the middle, and also what you're doing and what taking responsibility for what you do. So I started out, I think, making quite direct claims, and then as the shows got repeated and my career continued, I didn't want to be doing that. So I tried to get it to a place where I could be honest and dig into the the stuff that's actually interesting about magic, which isn't easy to find. Not because magic's not interesting, but I mean, it's interesting to us, but the stuff that makes it more than just, hey, look at me, aren't I clever? But I started off making these claims, and then I kind of brought it into a much more comfortable area where I could talk about the stuff that I found genuinely interesting. So that's sort of where I am now. And I think English audiences, in terms of that bell curve, know me as someone that kind of occupies that sort of ambiguous area, and that's kind of fine. And in terms of what I do the stage shows, which are kind of quite magic-y. I do the TV shows, which are very straightforward. There is no fooling the audience in those at all now. I took those to a very different place from the stage shows. And then I write and I do other things as well. So it's a kind of, I'm in a situation where I've just sort of got this, essentially a brand. I hate to think of it like that, but it sort of is, and it covers like a whole bunch of stuff. So I sort of feel that people sort of get it, and I've cultivated a thing where I'm very open about it. As I am in secret, I'm very open about, this isn't real, I'm not doing this. Where I am now, I think people get that. Not everybody, and there are still people that are going to say that I'm psychic. They're probably, or that I can really do X, Y, Z, and so on. But I think there are probably people that aren't really particularly watching me. They just associate that with my name or whatever. A little bit different in America, of course, going and doing secret because people don't know me. So I had to make sure with the show that, you're trying to have your cake and eat it. You're trying to go, this is amazing and compelling for that immediate reason of, oh my God, he just read your mind. But then you're also going, but if I didn't do that, and Secret was a show about how we get caught up in the stories and how we fool ourselves, and not only, and using magic as an analogy for that. So the thing that I'm doing and I'm fooling you now is the point, because this is what we do in life all the time. We are fooled by the story that we tell ourselves about what's going on. So the show was actually quite overt. In England, I did this, what's it called, mediumship in the second half of the show, and I had 50 people up on stage, and it was an interesting thing. So my approach to it was that I would give people impossibly accurate readings while saying, I am making this up, I'm lying to you, So, and it was done very, it was moving, and it was, hopefully very kind of fooling and so on. And people were crying, but I'm saying, so I've got your aunt here. I haven't really understand. I'm making this up, but her name is Susan. Is that correct? Yes. And she said she's saying to me, she's not saying anything, I'm lying to you, but she's saying to me she had a little dog called Jasper. Is that correct? Yes. And So first of all, I think that's a much more interesting place to put an audience, because they're also seeing people still being upset and me saying, are you right? Are you happy for me to carry on like this? Yes. So it's a really kind of interesting place theatrically, which is much more interesting than the question of, are you really psychic, or me just trying to make you think that I'm psychic. So first of all, from a theatrical point of view, I think it's interesting. I think, and ethically it's interesting and fine, and but I remember after that show, I had somebody at stage door say, oh, could you put me in touch with my grandmother? And I said, who died? And I said, well, I hope it's clear from the show that I'm not really doing it and I can't do that. And she said, oh, no, I know, I know you're making it up and everything, but would you be able to put me in touch with my dead grandmother? And it was a really interesting thing, because that dissonance that people can, there's no easy answer to it. It's a really rich area. I'm lucky in that I've had enough time, particularly in this country, to arrive at somewhere where I think it sits well, and I feel comfortable with it all. And the creative challenge is to be honest about it and to still make that interesting, because it is. There's a lot of potentially interesting grown-up stuff there that isn't just about, am I psychic or do I have special powers?
And it's amazing, one of the things that I've gathered from a little bit of the research that I've been doing recently is that part of what makes magic interesting is that glimmer into the unbelievable, that glimmer into the supernatural, or maybe not even more than human, but outside of the normal realm. That's part of the hook of magic. So it's interesting playing on that teeter-totter of saying, I don't want to go too far, but I do want a little bit of a look or an idea, that hints at there being something more going on.
Yeah, well, that's also kind of our job, isn't it, to sort of provide that. I think I never quite bought into the idea that, which I think was Paul Harris who said it. I'm sure it was. And I did buy into it for a while, but I eventually came out of this way of thinking that magic, takes us back to this childlike sense of wonder, which became a bit of a kind of a cliche for a while, because it was like a thing everybody could hang on to and go, this is why magic's important. Because I don't know if it really does. If you've got a magician that's just got bad breath and is rude, you're not transported anywhere pleasant. It's just another annoying magician. So I think I think magic doesn't do anything inherently at all, because it all comes down to that performance. So you can only think about how you're doing it and what you're sort of giving people. And luckily, I work with a director or two, so that's really, really helpful. So you can make sure that what you think you're doing, you're actually doing. It's actually coming across like that. So what magic as an idea encapsulates is that everything that we've sort of banished in our culture, for the last couple of 100 years, we've very proudly embraced the idea that progress will come through science and knowledge and those very, kind of rational human things, all of which is wonderful. There's brought us many, many great things. But along the way, we've lost the sort of power of cultural stories and myths and things that sort of help us along the way. So, for example, now, when people die, it's just sort of scary and absurd, and there's no meaning attached to it, and it's scary for the person, and there's no kind of framework in terms of it being a passage for people. And they don't have to be true. It's just about sort of knowing your place in something. The only story that we have that we attach to death nowadays is the brave battle that someone's fighting, which is not a helpful story. It's not helpful for the person dying who's now got to add failure to their list of problems. It just helps everybody else. So that's a clear example of where we've proudly got rid of morbid superstitions and myths around death, because why would we want those? But equally, we sort of something gets a bit lost in the mix. So it creates a bit of a gap, which is why psychics and mediums, however tawdry they are, will pack out venues, because it's just the promise of meaning around things like death, and also life, and just everything that's missing from that rational model that we've all sort of embraced. So I think that is what we're tapping into. Whether or not we provide it is a different thing, and it doesn't mean that magic has to be solemn. You can be serious without being solemn. You should always take it seriously. It doesn't mean it could also be hilarious, but that's its glimmer, and that's sort of why I've always found the sort of mentalist thing interesting, because it leans into that. But the trouble with it can also be really self-indulgent and really boring, and you don't often get a lot of light and shade in mentalism. But light and shade is really important in any kind of show. You have to have a different energy in the room for the different things that you're doing, and mentalism typically doesn't really do that. It's just really self-indulgent.
We spoke a little bit about one of the challenges of mentalism, which is kind of that whole, let me write it on a board and show it to you, losing all of the meat of what's going on. What else do you think mentalists or even magicians are getting wrong?
Well, that's really hard to say, isn't it? I think there are some things that are important which I don't see very often. So, as I said, light and shade in any sort of performance, particularly though where you're stringing more than one trick together, where whether you're doing a 20-minute set, 10 minutes at a table, or God help us, a full evening show. Light and shade, you need to think, well, if that trick was quite slow and serious, the next one probably needs to be quick and zappy and fun. Because I can see magicians that think they're doing that, but it's not quite enough. They're still operating within one way of being, which may be really nice and may have served them well in corporate jobs and so on. But particularly in a theatrical setting, you have a responsibility to move people in different ways. And that's more than just, well, that trick was with cards and this one's with socks, so this is like a fun one. Yeah. That's not enough. It's like it's a much bigger shift that needs to. So that's one thing. And then I suppose on that note, particularly a problem with mentalism is this indulgence thing. And I think you have to earn what you're doing on stage. So it took me a lot of shows before I started one that I would just come out and talk at the beginning. And didn't really do a trick for like, I don't know, 12 minutes or something, which was quite a long time before I got into anything. But being really aware of, so for example, that awful image of a mentalist that sort of comes out and, stares down the audience and then goes into something that's kind of quite slow and about his own sort of power. I mean, that can work. If you can deliver, then great. But given most people can't, you haven't earned it. So you've got an audience that are going to go, right, let's see where this goes. So if you deliver on it, okay, maybe you've won them over. But that's something I think about a lot. And at like real sort of micro levels as well, it's, you have to earn. Like if you're going to talk to the audience about how they should be or how they should think, which I tend to do quite a lot. Like you've got to earn that, and the way you earn that is to deflect a lot of stuff back against yourself. You make yourself vulnerable. So it's what a lot of good comics have always done. You kind of, the greatest comics really have something to say. They feel like they're kind of philosophers, but the way they get away with that doesn't feel like preaching. Is that they put themselves normally at a lower status than the audience and deflect a lot of the stuff back sort of against themselves, which is a really powerful thing. And it's something that I specifically have tried to do with what I do, because I noticed that as a pattern that was just very effective, the vulnerable sage, and so that's a style thing. That's just me and not necessarily applied to anybody else, but still earning things. Never have a better time than your audience. If you find yourself saying, wow, it's been an amazing show tonight, and you've all been fantastic, and all that. Don't be having a better time. An image I like, which Andy Nyman, who I'm sure you know, told me, and he got it from his sort of friend and co-writer and co-director, Jeremy Dyson, is the image of someone in the audience with their hat and coat under their seat. They're just on the verge of grabbing it and leaving. How do you keep that person engaged? What do you do just to keep them keep them in their seat, as opposed to, all right, I'm off? That is about things like light and shade and surprise. Surprise is part of that. And again, with mentalism, it's sort of you don't see it very much. Is to be likable. Like your job isn't to be Mr. Mystery. If you're 21 and you're in a suit, people know you're 21 and in a suit. There's that maybe doesn't fit right or whatever. It's like you do not have this sort of power. So you can have all of that power if you don't act like you're pretending that you've got it. So it needs to come from a place that's real. It's not that you're not powerful or that you're not brilliant, but you don't want to be just looking like you're posturing, because then you just lose everybody. So you want to withhold all of that stuff. We like performers for what they do, but we love them for what they are, and that's a really important connection that needs to be made. Is you need to love this person on stage. And I think ultimately, whether we're seeing a magician or a singer or a dancer or anything, we want a human being that we can connect with. And in a way, particularly with mentalism and certainly with magic, we're making that difficult, because we're sort of going, I've got this otherworldly power, which is saying you can't connect with me, like I'm doing something really special. So you've actually, I think, and I think this goes beyond just personal style. I think it is important. You have to find your way around that, because actually that's a problem. It's the one thing your insecurities want to hang on to, but actually to really connect with an audience, how do you get over the problem that you have these special powers or whatever that is, and it needs to be honest, which is, again, is a really interesting thing to be thinking about with something like mentalism.
Let's talk a little bit more specifics about a show. I know that you work with different people to put a show together. I know you work with Andy Nyman, and I know this is obviously kind of like a black box, but how does a trick make its way onto a stage? I know that's like, it could be years, it could be a masterclass, but what kind of things do you guys consider? What does it look like?
Well, we've just worked together on this one show, so showmen have just worked together. Secret was different because the material was coming from a lot of previous shows. So it's me, Andy Nyman, and Andrew O'Connor. And the three of us have worked together from day one on the early TV shows. Andy doesn't work on the TV anymore. He's just a very busy actor now, so he just works with the stage shows. So the three of us sit around and What we don't do is think about tricks that we like. That's not really part of the discussion. And notably, when we have done that, when there has been a trick that one of us has seen or kind of fallen in love with, that's always the problematic piece that we either end up taking out or feels a bit weak, or when we film it and the TV people go, all right, we'll have this, 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 and this. We need to lose, half the show because we've got to condense the whole thing down to an hour. Then they're always the ones that go. So that's the first thing. What we do talk about are, we start with the bigger things. What is the sort of general theme and movement and like heart of this show? What's it kind of about? So then that sets a kind of a tone. And then sort of within that, just thinking more sort of magically, what are some big, not really tricks, but what would a kind of, perhaps it might just be like an image or a weird
moment or
yeah, exactly. A moment which is leaning a little bit more into what's going to end up as a routine, but not really about a specific trick. So, like in Enigma, which is one of the shows that I did, there's a bit with a person on stage has been hypnotized. They're in a sort of like a smock, like a plain smock. I'd always pick somebody with long dark hair. They end up with their head down, so they now look a little bit like a kind of evil demon from an Asian horror film, and they're walking out in the audience with their finger pointed, hypnotized, with their head down, pointing out whoever this person is that they feel sort of drawn to, walking around the audience along the rows. And actually, all that was about was changing pocket. All it was in the end was they picked somebody, and the amount of money they had on their in their wallet was this person in the audience matched the amount that this person had written down before. So you're starting with just the sort of important stuff. There may also be some. Are there any big classic set pieces that maybe I haven't done that would be interesting to look at? Like I've never really done like a psychometry routine, but things like Spirit Cabinet and the Q&A and mediumship, big things like that. We can go. We haven't done that. Maybe there'd be a really interesting take on that. So you've got that kind of shape, that overall shape. And then we would start to think about the beginning and the end. Is the beginning a kind of fun, upbeat, hi, everybody stand up, it's me, let's do a thing? Or is it stranger? Is it more offbeat? And am I not on stage? Is there a weird announcement? Is the whole show different tonight and going to be improvised? Or, are there just weird starting points to begin with? And also what the ending is. That's always like a big, because all the shows really kind of over deliver. That's at least what we try and do. So finding our way towards a big ending. But that's still all of that. That's no specific tricks mentioned. Those are kind of the last. Well, I suppose the very last thing is how you do them, but the penultimate last thing is what the actual tricks are. Yeah.
You touched on it briefly, but I'll just bring it up. I think, especially in terms of magic, I don't think there is anybody who has a finale like you do. Many finales, many shows, they have such energy and such excitement in a way that shows that many magic shows don't. Maybe it feels like it comes to a nice little bow, but not in such a beautiful way. Do you have any thoughts for magicians about finales, either what they're getting wrong or maybe the lighthouse for you that you keep in mind for them?
With an early show, we kind of came up with the idea of tying up a whole lot of loose ends, something that would like predict the show in some way and make you think, oh my God, it's been doing this all the way through. There's sadly that again, a lot of these things end up just disseminating out into the ether. So there is a lot of that around now. It's really hard. I mean, there are sort of things that we found really do work, but I think that you can get away with like madness in a finale, which is nice, in a way that if you take your process seriously, you can't earlier on. You can't suddenly break the rules earlier on, or do weird double, that thing of spending a lot, working really hard to work out what someone's thinking of and then showing that you predicted it. And those strange, like, well, hang on, why did you? Whereas somehow in the madness of a finale, or particularly my finales, which do tend to be quite mad, there are a lot of those rules go out the window because there's just like an energy to it. for our finales, most of the inspiration has come from David Berglas, and he was, or is, the master of like the kind of free applause cues, like just taking something that is building and building and building in ways that are just joyous, and you you don't really stop and think, am I just sort of seeing the same thing twice in a different way? And if you are, it
Right.
just doesn't matter.
Right.
That
Right.
kind of thing is lovely, and I think is it's like I remember Richard Dawkins talking about like evolution is a very good theory because it's very simple but explains so much, as opposed to creationism, which is kind of the idea is of God like begs so many other questions, and so that actually it's kind of a bit topsy turvy. And it's the same with magic in that I love a thing that's very simple and creates so much, and whether that's just a misreading of something or a simple verbal ploy that creates a great effect that then also pays off later and doubles and triples, and by the end, you can't remember what it was, but you just know that it's amazing, is very appealing. And those kind of so I really look for those in finales. All I can really say is that it's the finale that people remember when they leave. So you can't mess it up. You don't want to be relying on methods that aren't going to work, or these horrible electronic things that are just terrifying. You just need to be in complete control of it, because it will go wrong, and everything that can go wrong will go wrong. So you're going to find out the hard way how to solve those things. I'm imagining this is for people that are doing, shows relatively often. So you just want to be able to be fully on top of it. And it should be a joy to do everything in your show. You should love doing, which is why I steer clear of any of these electronic things, because they're just like, I don't do any magic that I'm not doing. I'm not doing myself. It needs to really hit the spot, and it needs to be the thing that it's what you're leaving people with, and it just needs to be that. What it isn't is about the thing that's the most difficult for you, the performer, the most difficult thing in the world. That's not interesting. And I mean, you can tell people it's the most difficult thing in the world. That's a different thing, but it's still got to hit all those things. It's got to probably wake everybody up a bit, and it's
Not only with content, but also with energy.
Yeah, but look, there's a lot of different ways of ending a show. That is one way. I in one of my shows, Miracle, I purposefully ended it on more of a sort of like a thing, which is a bit different. And actually, the plan was to completely finish the show on that, but then we ended up having to rejig a lot of stuff at the end, so it did kind of come back, and there was a bit more of an up ending. But it's not that finales have to have the same energy and flavor to them. It needs to be a real choice. What are you leaving people with? It doesn't have to be just feel good. It could be really moved, or there's a lot of ways of ending a show in the way there's a lot of ways of ending a play. But it just needs to be a choice. And from a magic point of view, you need to be so across it, and the simpler the better. Although having said that, a lot of mine are quite complicated.
Let's change gears a little bit and talk about the television shows.
Yes.
You've done some pretty wild stuff on TV, or rather you've made other people do some pretty wild stuff on TV. How do you even come up with an idea to throw somebody into these like crazy situations? How do you even have the idea, like, what would be fun if Greg over here thinks it's a zombie apocalypse? Like, how do you get to something like that?
Well, one thing that helped is I don't do them that often. I maybe do one of these things a year. So that's helpful, because you're not having to churn out 16 ideas. I have a small team of people that I work with. Got Andrew O'Connor again, Ian Sharkey and Stephen Long, two good friends that I, again, worked on for years with these things. Ultimately, it's kind of up to me to drive that and drive the ideas and have the ideas that I fall in love with. So they tend to be, or a lot of the time it's me going, oh, why don't we just do this? And sometimes that's born out of just frustration. In fact, I think it might have been Apocalypse that we were I remember the three of us were talking and going round in circles about complicated, convoluted plots. And then I said, oh, can't we just end the world? And it's just zombies and it's got to go home. And I was like, oh, that's God, should we do that? And then you're just trying to stick with an idea that's like big and exciting and pure. There's another show on Netflix at the moment called the Push, which was Apocalypse isn't on, isn't but the Push where I remember Andrew saying, well, Channel 4, who initially commissioned it in Britain, they want like a big, stunty Derren Brownie thing. And I said, let's have a big party then, and we'll try and make somebody push someone off a roof. And it just sort of came out of one of those.
Right.
And it's a good one when it's a really simple idea, and you feel like, that's going to be a bit, we probably won't be able to do that. There'll be all sorts of legal reasons. Then it's a good one. So those are the ones we sort of stick with.
Right.
But they don't normally come out of lots and lots of talking. The best ones have just come out of a kind of a Sacrifice, which is the last one, was the show that followed the Push. And I think before the Push, it had also been something else quite dark. Can't remember what. So Andrew and I were walking around New York. It was around the time that I was doing my off-Broadway run. And we said, okay, so we need to find something that's quite like positive. So it's a nice surprise after two dark ones. So we've just like killed somebody. So I suppose the next one would be the opposite of that. I suppose saving a life. So that came out of that. And then there's two things. There's having a really compelling dramatic hook like that. Like, could you make somebody murder someone? Do you make somebody push someone off a roof? And the idea that there's just one poor guy at a huge event, everyone's an actor part. Like, all those things are like juicy and compelling. But then also, and this is again kind of for me, but you need to have I need to have a good reason for doing it, a kind of an intelligent reason for doing it, a point that you're making, and the Push actually is kind of least driven by that. I mean, it is more just a kind of a fun, anxiety-ridden kind of experiment. It just about gets away with that, but most of them are driven by a very clear sense of, this is the point. This is the sort of subtext of the show.
When you watch any of these specials, it seems like, excuse my my thought, but like freaking crazy. Like, do you have to get governments to allow this stuff? Like, who do you need to get a thumbs up from to not go to prison for like seeing if you can get someone to push someone else off a building? Like,
yeah.
Is it legal? Like, is it like, how do you get over those aspects of some of these broad ideas?
Rules and things may differ around the world, but we don't do anything. I mean, you're looking at a show that feels quite reckless, and I've done a lot of these over the years, so there's a kind of a machinery that's in place to make them work in a way that you can have all those checks and balances there without in any way kind of
risking anything for the person.
I was going to say, without undermining the reality that you're creating for that person.
Right.
So like in something like The Push, or a show where someone's going to go through this sort of dark journey, but they're going to reach an ending where they're happy and it was all worthwhile. So first of all, get them to apply for the show that they don't know it's for that show, or they think it's for something else, or doing that which becomes more difficult over the years as to how to maintain that. And then we'll pick our favorites. So in any show, like the same with Sacrifice, the last one, there were a group of people that we liked. And then they've got to have these independent psychological sort of verifications with a psychologist who knows exactly what's going to happen in the show. Because if you're going to witness a car crash, and someone's going to die, you don't want to do that on someone who saw their sister die in a car crash when they were young. So that has to happen, but they can't know that they've been chosen. So you start to create the fiction that everyone's getting this psychological evaluation, And bit by bit, and then there's the machinery of when they're actually going through the show and making sure that they're okay. So in Apocalypse, for example, when this guy thinks the world has ended and this is on YouTube and he's finding his way back to his family, we had to make sure that he felt safe at all times. So it was introduced quite early on that his family was safe. He had a safe place where the zombies couldn't get to. And there are things like that, just to the person's psychological welfare. While we're doing it and filming something like that, there are those independent psychological people are there with us. And we can all step in. I can step in at any point and either break it up, or normally the person's very suggestible, so I could hypnotize them and reframe the whole thing or whatever. So there's a lot in the air in terms of that person's well-being. And in terms of the permissions, I mean, you're not doing anything illegal. The only thing that is interesting, I've noticed, is things like when we've done the Milgram experiment and those kind of, which is where you think you're, electrocuting someone in the other room. So you'd have trouble doing those under any kind of clinical setting because the rules that are around clinical experiments are just very different from TV rules. So there's that certainly is a lot more lax. But otherwise, as long as you've got people's permission and they're happy with it, and everyone that's gone through these things it's been like life changing for.
In the shows, you follow up with a lot of these people who you've done these experiments with them 3 months or 6 months later or something to that end to see how their life has changed, how these moments have stuck with them. Have you ever followed up with them 5, 10, 20 years later and seen
Oh,
how...
totally. Oh, no, they're all, I mean, there's a lot of people that have gone through this, but certainly the guys and people that have been through the big stunt shows have all remained friends. So when Phil, who's the guy in Sacrifice, so we flew him over so he could watch the show, be happy with it before it was going to kind of go out. He came over and stayed with me, and he watched it once with me to get over the initial kind of shock of it. Watched it again I got the other guys, so the guy from Apocalypse and the guy from The Push, and I got people that had done those who would be the only people in the world that would appreciate.
Yeah, there's a really small Facebook group of just people who have been...
It's my tiny army.
Yeah.
All awaiting their signal. So... yeah, so they came over and he met them, which he'd seen the show, so that was kind of exciting. So then he watched it with them. And then he mentioned he was a big fan of, I don't know if you know Martin Freeman, the actor who's in Sherlock and so on. So I happen to know Martin. So then I got him to watch it again with Martin. So now by this point, I know because this is all about getting him to a place where he's comfortable with the show. Because it's very odd having something that you've been through, which is life-changing, seeing it now it's edited. There are bits that were hugely important to you that maybe couldn't use, and there was one bit that was really meant a lot to him that we just couldn't use in the show for reasons of light and shade and so on. And also seeing your bits with music underneath. So it's actually just a weird thing seeing something as a TV project that's meant so much to the person. So I needed him to watch it a few times. The last time we watched it with Martin, because I knew by that point he'd be feeling kind of proud and excited, which was a kind of where I wanted to get him to, because a hero of his is watching them. So stuff like that is sensitive. And yeah, I've stayed friendly with them. And the guy that did Apocalypse is now, he went from being this kind of really kind of lazy, selfish, utterly adorable, but lazy and selfish guy driving his family mad, to now he's been working at a special educational needs school, and he's just got married, and he's got his own place, and he's just brilliant. He's a great guy. So yes, is the short answer. Because I don't do that many of them. It's easy to remain friends with these.
Right.
Yeah.
And on the same note, did you ever, orchestrate a show of this size and end up having to pull the plug and say, you know what, the guy just doesn't believe that this dog is talking to him for real or whatever, and say scrap it?
Talking pets, make a note. No, I mean, there are, as you see in Sacrifice, there are bits that don't work, but that's kind of fine. We've kind of got the end point we want to get to, and if he doesn't quite get there by the route I want him to, then I can kind of nudge him around a different way, So that's fine. But yeah, it's a good question, isn't it? And I do hear that. Well, and I think that's, if people that think, it must all be fake, that's probably one of the reasons. It's well, what if he hadn't done it? It just wouldn't have worked. But then either it would have been, it didn't work, and maybe is that interesting within the context of the show that it didn't work, which is a perfectly viable way to go. And then is there a follow-up thing that could happen after that? And then you realize, it wasn't about that, actually, it was about this. Or are there other ways of getting him to do it, without breaking the fiction of what he thinks is involved in? And that's the luxury of making a TV show, but it's still has to be just this authentic thing that you're putting somebody through. But if it doesn't quite work, then you can shift and change it. And then what you say at the start, the challenge you start off with and set yourself, you can set the whole thing up with a slightly different mood that will allow for a different sort of ending if it went in a weird direction.
I know we touched on this a little bit in the beginning when we were talking about shows and performing and some of the decisions that you have to make about how your audience is supposed to interpret you and what you're doing and saying. And again, I'm just going to start with this kind of overarching thing. What are magicians getting wrong about the topic of character in performance?
It's really hard, this recurring thing of what a magician's getting wrong.
And we don't have to approach it in that way. We can come at it.
No, I totally get what you're getting at. I think it's sort of, there's a million ways of doing things. There should be as many different ways of doing magic or mentalism as there are magicians and mentalists, So I remember seeing a guy who must have been maybe 14 doing an act at the Magic Circle years ago, and it was a good, solid adult. I don't mean adult as in like obscene, but just like a grown up, like a very corporate act. But he was like 13. It's like, oh, be 13. Like, I mean, I don't know if he was a skateboarder, but if you were a skateboarder, make it about skateboarding, something. It's not about, there are ways of doing it and there are bad ways of doing it. I think things feel like they're going wrong or aren't right if they don't fit within the logic of what you're creating. So if you are a 13-year-old skateboarding magician and you start with that and then suddenly you're Mr. Corporate, that would be weird. That would be a mistake. But it doesn't mean that doing magic in a corporate style is a mistake. It's just within that context, it might feel odd. And then, I think it's important to be likable, but there are, there are very few, but there are magicians that can get away with being really unlikable, but they just do it so well that it kind of just really works. So I think and you were asking about character, were you, in terms of what feels right or wrong about that? I think you have to be careful about maybe things that bleed out wrongly into your characters. I think it's more about that. So, for example, constantly apologizing for the magic, constantly sort of just making fun of it and undermining it, because in your heart, they think you're stupid for doing it, or that, it's that those kind of things bleed into a sort of character where you're constantly undercutting what you're doing, which can be funny, but it also can set a tone after a while that's slightly feels, can feel a bit wrong. That's just something I notice a lot. But even if it isn't that, those just be careful about insecurities and things that sort of bleed into it, and particularly being Mr. Powerful and Mr. Invincible and Mr. kind of or Miss or Mrs. I can do anything. It's all right if you're just one guy doing one trick, but if that's like a character that people are going to sit with for an hour or two, that could be really, obnoxious, because again, they're desperate to connect with a human being, and failure is part of that, and struggling is part of that. I've always loved, and I took a lot from Teller talking about that. Magic's very bad drama, because if you can click your fingers and make anything happen, then you're a god figure, which means there's no struggle. You can make anything happen. So that's kind of, and what we want is a hero who struggles and tries to do something, and then maybe it goes wrong, or he ends up somewhere he didn't think he was, or she didn't think they were going to be at when they were starting off. And those things are what's interesting dramatically. So I try and find that and use that. And the reason why the TV shows have gone off in that other route is that I realized it was dramatically much more interesting to watch real people go through real situations with real conflict. That's proper drama. Me saying, I set myself this challenge and I give myself 2 hours to do it. Can I defeat the weird variables that I've set up for myself tonight? There's just not. There's no real drama in that. So being human, and it's so difficult in terms of style and character, because there are so many ways of doing it. But in terms of being aware of insecurities that bleed into it, there is a good starting point is honesty and humanity. I think it's a good starting point for anything. And even if you're going to go off into quite extreme areas, I think it still needs to root in that, because it's like when it's rooted in that, there's a thing in the air that people respond to, and know what to do with, and don't just think you're a dick. And I think that's what we all really fight against in this job.
On that note of God versus hero, I think it's a great way to understand our role in magic. And like you said, one of those challenges that magicians are trying to, or whether they're intentionally trying to overcome it or not, is that, look at me, I'm so great. I can snap my fingers and anything can happen. And you've kind of figured out how to sidestep that by using yourself as not the all-powering God, but as maybe the conduit to allow them to get into this new other world or other space. Can you dig a little bit more into that?
I think it's quite a specific thing. I tried to make the shows about the audience, not about me. And I think I hadn't quite realized I was doing that until my manager mentioned it. And he said, "Oh, you're the only magician probably," sorry, this is his words, not mine. "You're the only magician probably in history that makes a show about the audience, not about them." I thought, oh, that's amazing and lovely, and maybe I can now keep that in the air as something to be conscious of, as something to aim for. So now I do, and I think again, what you aim for isn't necessarily what you achieve. So it doesn't mean that I'm doing that, but that's certainly an idea that I really try and keep in the air. And of course, it's a show where I'm on stage doing, my stuff. So of course, you're looking at me and hopefully, clapping and going, "Oh, it's amazing," or whatever. That's kind of, I get that that's part of it, but the heart of the show is never about me, and I think that is a very helpful place to be. But I don't know if I could have really done that 20 years ago, because I wanted everything to be about me.
Right.
And I did come out staring out the audience and literally standing, doing, staring.
Was there a turning point for you to kind of step away from that "look at me, I'm so great" type magic and into your thinking now?
I just grew up. I think I grew up and I didn't need that. I never show anybody tricks in real life. I can't bring myself to. And I love, like, Andy Nyman he's brilliant at the kind of the conversational segue into a trick. And he's got, so many fun, weird, hoary old magical props around his place. And he's brilliant at kind of doing that. And it's lovely. It's a real treat. There's nothing wrong with it. But for me, I think because I had to do that all the time, I now just really, I don't like the strange dishonesty of it, the shift that happens in a conversation when you're trying to make it about that and the thing that you do, let alone how you move out of it afterwards. So having said that, I've been reading the Andy that does the jerks, and my God, I mean, they are phenomenal. So I love that idea of going completely large on them, but I think it's probably weirdly not for me, or only in very specific circumstances. I don't have that desire anymore to kind of impress in the way that I did. So I think it was around somehow in that shift. I remember having conversations in my 30s, sort of going, I don't know if I want to carry on doing this, but it feels weird stopping now because I've got a career and I'm sort of known for it. It'd be weird to just stop, but I don't find it interesting anymore. And I think around that time, it was probably when I was talking to Teller, and something shifted that made the TV shows about other people. And that was a very helpful little switch that went, you do something, you follow your gut, and then you start to find the language for it. And then as you find the language for it, it becomes more of a conscious, yes, so I'm more about this and I'm happier with that. And that feels more grown up. I've now done the sort of thing I do now, I feel I've done for quite a while. And I'm getting a similar restlessness about it.
I know you've touched on this a lot, but there have been a lot of your ideas that have almost become like synonymous with the word mentalism, have almost become for new people that are coming into the world of magic and mentalism. Like, it's very hard to be like, no, that's just like a cheap Derren Brown, like that's not really who you should be enjoying, or whatever the case may be. So what's your feeling on how what you've done has really spread into the world of magic?
I think at first it was sort of galling and strange to spend, months coming up with an idea and then see a version of it on magic sites. And not even like, oh, this is Derren Brown's thing, but the classic of mentalism, which hand is the thing, all that kind of stuff. Like it's just sort of been around forever. So that at first that was kind of made me feel a bit, not exactly angry, but a bit like, oh, just sort of weirdly violating. Then there was a subtler thing of just kind of style, people sort of, kind of having a style that sort of got adopted. But then part of the creative process involves copying. That is a very normal. When I started doing hypnosis, the only hypnotist I knew was this guy, Martin Taylor. And I'm sure if he'd have come and seen any of my early hypnosis shows, he'd have felt the same thing. I was just doing him because that's all kind of I knew. So you have to do that at the start. You do have to copy. And it's unfortunate within mentalism that there are a few. There should be many, many more ways of doing it. One of the great things of more women in magic and mentalism is it sort of starts to kind of let things breathe a bit and open up some other ways of doing it and ways of thinking. Ideally, you grow beyond that, and you do find your own thing. again, it's not in my control. I realized very early on my way of dealing with it way back when it was feeling really galling, and there was suddenly a lot of mentalists that when I heard their names, I'd sort of have this like bad feeling. I thought, well, I can't be how I'm going to live. So I sought them out and made friends with them. I kind of figure, well, if I'm friendly with somebody, it will be very hard to feel bad about what they're doing professionally. I don't have to ever watch them work. So I sort of did that, and that's sort of been my approach. I don't probably want to watch them doing stuff that I'm using. They're sort of half using my lines and things that I know exactly where that thought process came from to come up with that. And this, that's not a nice feeling. So I just don't particularly watch them, and then I just try and make sure they don't have any grudges or any kind of negative feelings towards the individuals. Because whenever I meet them, they're lovely. We're all like insecure, and we're all doing our best, and it doesn't matter. It's entertainment and tricks.
Obviously, before all of this whole self-isolation thing went on, you were on a ramp launching right into the brand new show, The Showman.
We were going to go into the theatre on the Monday. We finished on the Friday, lockdown happened, and yeah.
Obviously, we don't know kind of right now we're in the thick of it, so we don't know when things are coming back. But what can people expect for maybe when it does come back? What can people look forward to or even just think about this upcoming show without giving away too much? Tell us how this is different and what we should be excited about.
Well, Showman, it'll start like as soon as we can, because it is ready. It's ready to go. We'll have another little rehearsal period and have the luxury. It's nice having a bit of time to think about it and maybe make some further changes. And then it'd be very weird to go out and do a show and not talk about the experience that we've all been through for the last 4 months. But actually, so I don't quite know what it's going to be about, because that may change. However, the heart of the show is, which weirdly is very applicable to the whole COVID-19 thing, is that we are all connected by the very things that make us feel most isolated. That was always, to me, the heart of the show. When we are most like alone, scared, and anxious, or whatever, when we feel like we're just sort of a failure, those feelings are. That's what kind of life is. Like, life is showing you its precise weight, which means it's also the things that everybody shares, everyone that's alive. So it's the thing that makes you feel isolated is actually the thing that connects you with everybody else. And now, of course, like weirdly, we're going through like a very literal manifestation of exactly that thought. So that's helpful in a way, because it means I probably don't have to completely rewrite the show to allow for what's happened since. In terms of the content of the show, I don't want to say. Plus, we're also still slightly, going back and forth and changing things. And then we change so much in the first week when we do previews, because until you get it in front of an audience, you just don't know what's going to work. So, and like literally, like a lot of the stuff I do needs a large crowd for it to just work. Technically, like in Miracle, or the recent show I did, I was doing faith healing, and I stepped out on that first night not knowing if the second half of the show would work at all. Until you got 1,000 people, when you're kind of working with a percentage that will be responsive, you can't do that in a rehearsal room. So anyway, so a lot will also change, which is another reason why I don't like talking too much about the specifics of what's in it. But I think it's very special, and I can't wait, because it's 5 years since I've done a proper, like, brand new show. And it's also exciting to do something that isn't already really well formed and comfortable, which is how Secret has felt for a while. So that's kind of like
feels fresh again in many ways.
It feels fresh and slightly nervy. Yeah, I was a bit of me was relieved that the whole isolation thing happened.
Well, yeah,
it was like,
it's like phew.
So yeah.
I love what you were saying about it, and something that came to mind, I heard someone say this recently, which is we think that what brings us together most is those moments where we say, I never thought of it like that, but really what brings us together most is when we say, wow, I thought I was the only one who thought about it like that. And it resonates with what you're saying about what separates us is usually the thing that we have most in common and that brings us all together.
Exactly, which changes everything.
The last thing I want to talk about, actually, I have two more little things, and then we'll wrap up. The second last thing I guess I want to talk about is a different one of your books. You wrote some books for the general public, and the most recent one was Happy, about living with Stoic thinking and the Stoic philosophy, which is a lovely book, and I think that kind of thinking is really important. How has that thinking affected how you have, internalized this COVID-19 self-isolation situation? How has that kind of thinking affected how you've thought about it? And maybe how can some people at home, magicians or not, use Stoic thinking or some things that you can pull from it?
I wrote about Stoicism. It's mainly about Stoicism. I don't think of myself particularly as a Stoic, but it really, as a school of philosophy that's 2,000 years old, it resonated with how I naturally felt in life. So, for example, not really having any ambitions around work and so on, but just wanting to make sure things were in the right place in the present, has always sort of guided me through and always made me feel like I was a bit of a child in a world of grown-ups. But the nice thing about reading the Stoics that you kind of go, oh, okay, maybe that's a sensible way of thinking. So they're very much about not trying to control things that are out of your control. The only things that are in your control are your thoughts and your actions, hence your talent and your energy if you're developing yourself as a performer. And everything else, what other people do and what they think, or whether you get the lucky phone call or the gig or whatever, or the promotion, or not under your control. And you shouldn't bother about them. You should decide they're fine as they are. I suppose where that applies here is their model of happiness was about avoiding anxiety. It's just about sort of tranquility, really. That's how they saw it. So the thing about only controlling what's within your control, your thoughts and your actions, is a great recipe for avoiding anxiety. Because you only get anxious when you try and control things that are out of your control, right? That's what makes you frustrated and anxious. I mean, I've been just focusing on organizing stuff in my life that needed organizing, and cleaning the house, sorting out all the just crap that's built up over the years, which is, I find, really cathartic. And I haven't engaged with the news particularly. The important stuff comes to you, you find out the stuff that's important, but I haven't engaged in this sort of narrative of the panic. So I've just kind of, looked after those things that are within my, and I don't think of myself doing that as a Stoic technique, but it's an approach of tranquility. The rules are fairly easy to follow. I'm also naturally quite introverted, and so the isolation thing is quite straightforward for me. My partner's the opposite. He's quite extroverted, so he finds it much more frustrating than I do. But so that sort of sits comfortably, and I'm getting on with my own thing. I'm writing and painting, and that's sort of and I've had lost people that are close to me and stuff. So it's not like I've been really lucky and nothing bad's happened. But I think it's okay just to sort of separate yourself from the needless anxiety and just worry about your own thing.
Before we get into the wrap-up questions, I just want to, I guess, touch on this overarching theme in a lot of your work personally, which is the theme of the stories that we tell ourselves. And that's been an overarching theme in a lot of your work. And the most recent time that I saw you on Broadway, I was lucky enough to be part of the show. And
oh, no way! What did we do?
Yeah. I was at the foot of the stage with the dictionary.
With the dictionary, of course you were. Yes,
yes. And I had just such an incredible moment at the foot of that stage, looking right into your eyes and having you impassionately talk about the stories that we tell ourselves. And I've been performing my entire life. I've been on stage a lot. And that was like the most intense moment that I've ever had like in my life on stage and in the theater space. So amazing. I wanted to pass that on, and also just kind of give the opportunity to say, what is it about, the stories we tell ourselves, that type of thinking that you want to share, or the message that you kind of want to get out to the people of the world about that subject that is held so close to you for so long?
And actually that moment in the show is kind of, for me, was a lovely moment too, because it's actually the one bit where I say exactly what the show's about, but in a way, again, you don't want to be preachy, so I do it in a way that feels a bit like it's off the cuff and a bit of a non-moment that maybe wasn't going to happen every night, and yeah, it's a lovely bit. Oh, that's really nice. So, well, there's two things. First of all, when I was writing the Happy book, this idea of that we live by these narratives formed alongside that. A big thing with Stoicism that we kind of get nowadays as well, but they really, really thought about it back then, is that it's not events in the world that cause our problems. It's how we respond to those events. It's our judgments that we make about the events, and therefore the stories we tell ourselves about what's going on. It's easy to say that. It's another thing to kind of really take that on board. But if you can imagine somebody else responding differently to the problem that you've got, then if you can imagine them responding to it in a way that was fine, then that's like, there's your proof. Like, it's not the problem. It's the way you're responding to it. And that really kind of made sense to me. And it's important because the idea of narrative, sort of since I wrote this book, like in the last few years, has become very much in the air. Like we talk a lot about my story, whether my story is being heard, people being written out of stories and cultural stories and so on. And so suddenly it has become like a bit of a thing, more in the mainstream maybe than it was when I was writing the book. But so it's become important, I think, in a new way now, because the point is not just to own your story. The point is not to see whether you're in or out of a story as a kind of life or death situation. I mean, it's nowadays that people talk about not being involved in the narrative of something as like almost sort of personal harm, like personal jeopardy to them. So the idea that language and harm have become tied up is sort of interesting. The important thing, the very nature of a story, is that it's selective. Stories are things told around campfires in a clearing in a forest. So what you have there is a little patch of light where people have gathered, and all this darkness around it, all this stuff that is being excluded. That's the nature of a story. All this messy stuff that doesn't fit is excluded, and what you have is a lovely, neat thing that encapsulates. That's why characters have arcs in stories. We don't have arcs in real life. Actually, what struck me as important is that it's not just about, you must own your story or own your narrative. It's about realizing it is just a story, and that your perspective of the world, or that your understanding of what's happening in a situation, or that your understanding of yourself is just a story. And you can step out of that. You can change a story. You can realize where a story does need closure. So, again, at the end of life, if you finish a book or a movie, the end scene or chapter normally makes sense of everything that's happened, that's come before. That doesn't happen in life. So at the end of life, we need to find those closures and make sense of it. But it doesn't happen naturally. We sort of tend to become cameos in our own deaths very often. Sorry to be talking about morbid subjects, but it's the story side of it's important. We tend to be de-authored, and everybody else is making decisions at the one time that we should be making decisions. So stories started to become really important. And then when I was putting Secret together, and I had all this material essentially strung together from previous shows that I liked best, and I was struggling to find what the heart of that show was, I realized after, whatever it was, 16 years of touring, that, magic, what makes magic worthwhile isn't that it's a childlike state of astonishment, to me at least, of those things that people say. It is a perfect analogy for exactly that process that we have. There's reality. It's an infinite data source. There's an infinite number of things that we could think about or pay attention to, so we can't. So we look at it and we make up a story about what we've just seen or experienced or are experiencing, and we work with that story. And magicians are exploiting that process. Like, we're nudging people to pay attention to this bit, then this bit, then this bit, A, B, and C, and miss, A.1 and A.2 and the things that happen in the middle, and to join up the dots in a particular way. And that is what we're doing in life. So that's what Secret ended up being about. And that moment, that dictionary moment that we had, and I knew I'd seen you before somewhere, so that makes sense now, is sort of really about that, that it kind of, I think it releases us a bit, because there's always more going on. There's always stuff going on that you don't see. And we had this moment after the Oracle Act, which was a kind of very pure, direct mind reading, like basically a Q&A act. And going back to that question of ethics, how do you find ways of doing things that are also allow you to not just say, I can do this. So I framed it as an old thing that charlatans essentially used to do. And coming out of it, having that bit there, I was able to say, look, there's all this stuff going on that you don't know about, and that's the point, because that's what happens in life. That's what we're dealing with every day.
That's beautiful, and I think that it's important in the time right now when, we can all look at the situation and paint certain stories, and we can also just use this as maybe a reminder to step out for a second and, if need be, rewrite the story that either serves us or rewrite the story that benefits our overall story, how we look back at this. One way I've been thinking about it is to say there will be a time when we look back at this and we can either look back and say like, oh man, look how my entire life was on pause and all of this, or we can look back and maybe have something positive to say and how we are hopefully rewriting that part of our story and say, in a moment that was so unfortunate for the globe, I found a way to get that project done that I've always wanted to do, or, whatever that thing is.
Found a new way of working. That's a big thing, isn't it? All these new ways of working, and I think hopefully the world won't just go back to where it was. We'll have all taken a pause. And what a great thing! There are dolphins in Venice. Yeah. There are now dolphins swimming along the streets essentially, because they're like the world has changed, and hopefully it won't just go back to exactly the madness that it was. This is kind of a different sort of madness, and I know we're not exactly in the front line of it, but again, just for us, and all we have really is our own situation to deal with, there can be an opportunity for taking pause.
There's a few wrap-up questions that I ask each person on the podcast. So the first is about the world of modern magic. So, and I don't know, obviously, how plugged in you are to what's going on now, but what is something going on in the world of magic right now that you like, and something going on in the world of magic right now that you don't like?
Oh, God. I'm not very plugged in at all. I really am not. The world of kind of cardistry and so on, I know some lovely people in it. I don't sort of really get it. But that feels like a really old-fashioned thing to say. I've got nothing against it, but it sort of leaves me a bit cold. Going back to Christian Grace's billet switches, that was kind of, because when I wrote Pure Effect, it was a reaction against the world of billet switches and paper switching, which kind of is what mentalism was. And now, because it all feels like there are these horrible, terrifying electronic things, that was really kind of exciting, seeing somebody play with billets. But I don't know whether that's a whole big new thing that's around, or whether he's kind of spearheading a new movement. But that was kind of fun and exciting. And other than that, yeah, I don't feel very clued in. There's a lot of tattoos and a lot of amazing card skills, and I sort of don't care. I just like being, surprised. I love magic when it pulls me in, and I find, as I've been around it a lot, there's more things that push me away, but that's just, I've seen a lot of it. So I'm not very good at rapid answers.
That's okay.
That's a long rambling answer.
That's A-okay. The next one is the endless chain. So in order to keep the podcast going on for eternity, each guest is asked to recommend another guest who would be perfect for this kind of conversation. So who would be fabulous for this kind of talk about magic? Oh, there is two caveats. The first caveat is that I cannot have had interviewed them already, which I think will probably be okay.
Yes.
And then the second caveat is you have to be able to put us in contact.
Okay. I adore Stephen Long. Do you know him?
Mm-hmm. That'd be great.
/ Hector Chadwick. I'd happily put you in touch. I think he's a great man and a lovely magician. And in fact, I think of all the mentalism shows I've seen, his is the best example of someone just doing their own thing that just comes from them and just bears no relation to anyone else's mentalism. I remember seeing it, and just any mentalist would go, I had no idea you could do it like that. Of course, it isn't just about whether you profess psychic ability. There's just like a million ways of presenting that sort of material, and his was just so brilliant and refreshing. He's just great. I love him.
He'd be a very great person to interview and to chat with. The last thing is the take-home point. So people have been listening to us talk about magic for a long time now, many different aspects of it. If there's one thing that people think back to this episode and this conversation, if there's one thing that magicians can take from this, what would be an amazing one thing for magicians to remember from this conversation?
Be human. be likable in whatever way that is for you, because weirdly, so many magicians like work to be the least likable versions of themselves. So the starting point should be, what's the most likable version of yourself, and start with that, and find a way of just making sure that you love it, and that it, just whatever that is for you. But those things are important, because they're important for you in terms of your own longevity and your own sanity, but they also really make a difference to how people connect with you when they're watching. And connection with people is like the biggest stumbling block and the biggest issue, I think, with magic. Is actually how do you make it connect? And it's not about the trick. It's about your humanity.
Beautiful. Well, I think that is awesome thing for people to take home, and an awesome way to wrap up this episode. Derren, thank you so much. This was such a pleasure. The world is on pause, Showman is on pause, but where can people find you? Where can people keep up to date with what you'll be doing when things start back up again?
I have a Twitter feed at Derren Brown. I'm also on Instagram, still working out some of that. As I said, I'm 49, but there, really, I suppose, is the best way. I'm derrenbrown.co.uk. Yeah, I tend to announce anything on there in terms of what's going on. There'll be some new TV and stuff in the pipeline, but we're working all that out at the moment. Meanwhile, there's just a lot of parties I'm going to, just really busy. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. That's incredible, and I will just say that you're right now pretty active on Instagram, answering questions and doing some fun things. So you did a little Q&A the other day.
Yeah, I was trying to work out some of the more exciting features.
Yeah. So if you want to watch Derren learn Instagram, go follow him and get a front row seat at that. Thank you so much, and of course, a big thank you to everybody who tuned in and listened and learned and was a part of all of this. Hopefully, you can put some of this stuff into action. Thank you as always, and I'll see you next Thursday. Well, there you have it. I hope you liked the episode, and I hope, as always, of course, that you learned something. Now, more than ever, I am begging you, I am pleading you to share this with the world. If you liked it, if it was meaningful, please spread the word and share it. Let people know about it. Otherwise, come be a part of the Discourse in Magic family. You can go to discourseinmagic.com and join the newsletter, or you can go to Discourse in Magic on Facebook and join the new Discourse in Magic group, where we are talking about so much. And every Wednesday, there's some live, cool webinars teaching you different things about your business. And right now, we're talking about virtual magic. So come join the fun. Come be a part of the community. Thanks for being here. Spread the word. Love you lots. See you Thursday. Peace.